Hello, how's everyone doing today? I hope you guys are doing fine. So for my topic today, I chose to talk about GMOs, and I know this is a really controversial subject in our family, but I'm not going to put any personal opinions into it. I'm just going to be talking more about the facts. So the first question that I always get is, what in the world are GMOs? Okay, well, GMOs, the term actually GMO stands for genetically modified organism. Now, according to Webster's definition, a GMO is the result of a laboratory process of taking genes from one species and inserting them into another in an attempt to obtain a desired trait or characteristic. Now, a lot of people get confused sometimes with that. So I have a good way of kind of describing it in a better way. So, you know the cut and copy and paste options on Microsoft Office. Well, imagine this. Imagine scientists copy or cut a specific amount of genes or a specific trait from one organism, and they take those genes or that trait and they paste it or insert it into another organism, and they hopefully, theoretically, it will obtain that trait or characteristic. So let's go to all the way back to the 1850s. And the 1850s is when scientists first started to discover DNA. Now, DNA is very important in genetic engineering because that's what it is. Genetic engineering is the messing of DNA. So again, let's go back to the 1850s. So the 1850s is when scientists started to really research, study, and even categorize DNA. I'm talking about scientists like Mendel and his P's and a lot of other people. So this is where they really started to figure out, hey, look, DNA and what it is and how it kind of works. Now, as time goes on, scientists really start to get more and more involved and understand what DNA is. Now, by 1970s, DNA was a big thing. I mean, they were really going into it, into the structure, how it's made, how they can copy it. And actually, by 1970s is when two scientists by the name of Stanley Cohen and Herbert Boyer invented the first technique of DNA cloning. Now, this is very important because how else are we going to copy DNA if we don't know how it works? So, as time goes on, those two scientists and another by the name of Annie Chang create the first genetically modified DNA organism. So this was practically the first GMO that was invented by these three people. So as the 1970s continue on to the 1980s, the first GMO patent was actually issued. Now this was a big thing. This was an actual court case between a genetics engineer at General Electric and the U.S. Patent Office. Now, they settled this court case by 5-4 Supreme Court ruling, which was pretty impressive because this allowed the first patent on a living organism. Now, the GMO that was used in this specific court case was a bacteria that ate crude oil. And again, as time goes on, more and more research is done, and GMOs become more and more relevant, as we can see nowadays. So by 1982, the FDA approves its first GMO. That GMO was called humulin. Humulin is a bacteria, well in this case it's E. coli, that produces insulin for human purposes. And I also want to break this up now. There are two categories of GMOs, or two fields that GMOs are used in. GMOs can be used in the medical field for medical purposes, and they can be used in the agricultural field for purposes such as producing crops. What I mean by that, in the medical field, we see a lot of bacteria that produces, for instance, humulin. Let's use that. Humulin produces insulin for people who can't produce it themselves. That is one example of it being used, or GMOs being used in the medical field. There's also gene therapy, 3D printing, and other things like that. In the agricultural field, which is what we see more and more and hear of more and more, is where crops and produce are being genetically modified to withstand certain temperatures or climates, and a lot of things that we see. A lot of GMO products that are in the agricultural field are things such as tomatoes, corn, beans, wheat, and so on and so forth. There are many more, especially nowadays. And another good question that I get a lot of times is, how common are GMOs? Well, if we're talking food-wise, GMOs, according to the U.S. statistics, in just the U.S. alone, statistics say that 80% of all conventional processed foods contain GMOs. So that's a good amount, of GMOs nowadays. So it was only in 1994 when actually the first GMOs started to come into the stores, into grocery stores. The FDA approved it, and this is when you started seeing things like the Flavor Saver tomato in stores. Now, the Flavor Saver tomato is just a tomato that saves its flavor, or has a longer shelf-lasting time, therefore saving its flavor for longer periods of time. So, as you can see, we see a lot of GMOs nowadays in public and society because they're so useful in many places and cost efficient for farmers. GMOs are highly likely to be used in America, and mostly America, while other countries really actually either have put bans or just don't use GMO products at all. I don't want to go into the personal opinions are GMOs safe to use, but in the US they are allowed, and in many other places they're not. It's only a couple other countries that actually allow GMO products. So, and let's go on here. Let's see. Now, another good question I get is, who are the creators of these GMOs? GMOs are created by laboratories which are funded by big corporations that actually make business by patenting certain GMOs, or certain genetically modified organisms that make them money. So this is where we see a lot of GMOs, and why we see a lot of GMOs nowadays is because they're actually big business, and good business for that. And so I hope you guys learned a lot about GMOs. I'm kind of running out of time here, and I mean I could keep going, but this is just the good information. So hopefully you guys learned something about them and where they come from, what they do, what it is, and I hope this was a very informational or informative speech for y'all. And if I can now please ask y'all to fill out that form that's in the middle of the table. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you for listening to my speech, and have a great rest of the night.